So welcome everybody to our privacy event, November. A little bit of snow on the ground here, but it's nice and warm and cozy inside. So this is Privacy is Good for Business, and we are really focusing on real life lessons. So the theme today is business people talking to business people. And so we want to make privacy and data protection relevant for you as you operate your business. My name is Nigel May, and I am with the JWT Privacy Group. My colleague and partner Ian Sutherland is also on the call. And we're also very privileged today to have a special guest, Steve Beckett from the Global Privacy Group. And just to let everybody know that today's session is being recorded. All right, so we'll break today's session into 3 segments. The first will be Devil's Advocate, and as a business owner, I will speak to you about why we don't need to prioritize privacy. That will lead us into a roundtable discussion where we'll be getting support from our colleagues on the phone. And please feel free either during the presentation or during the roundtable to raise your hand, enter a question in the chat window, or ask to be unmuted and just speak directly. And then just as a fun way to wrap it up, we thought that we would play a little bit of Privacy Jeopardy. I will go over the rules very quickly for our colleague Steve in Wales, if you may not be familiar with the game, but we thought that would be a lighthearted way to tie it all together. So let's jump in. So let me play Devil's Advocate. As a business owner, I want to spend my time, my effort, my money wisely. For me, that means focusing on efficiencies within my business, growth, and customer service. I know that regulatory and legal obligations, whether it's privacy, taxes, filing requirements, are a necessity. They're simply not a priority. So with that said, introducing that as a business owner, Steve, would you like to add anything to that statement?
Yeah, of course, Nigel. So we're focusing on the business owner, and the business owner wants their business to grow. So when we look at efficiency, growth, and customer service, the number one thing that comes out to me is privacy. Obviously, aids your customer service. It gives your customers that reassurance that privacy, data protection, and cybercrime prevention are paramount to your business, and it can grow your customer base as well. So, you know, the message could be, I don't care, I'm not going to be bothered. And that's going to hinder your customer service.
Well, that's a perfect segue into another statement, and that is, it's really a lot of work to manage personal data. So again, as a business owner, do I really want to invest that amount of effort? Ian, would you like to respond to that?
Sure, thanks, Nigel. I mean, I look at it this way, you know, over and above what you want to do and what you should do for data privacy and data protection, it's good for your business to have your data organized and manage it in a systematic way. You use it for customer contact, use it for employee information, you use it for buying and selling goods, paying invoices. There's all kinds of reasons why having your data organized is just plain good for your business. And then you add into that what Steve mentioned about, you know, how important it is to be compliant and to be giving your customers the comfort level that their data is safe with you. So look at it both in terms of privacy, but just in terms of being well organized, having a good handle on your data for all reasons, and putting it to good use.
Thanks, Ian. I couldn't agree more. And what we're focusing on here is what we call PII, which is personally identifiable information that can specifically identify an individual. And that is the focus of privacy and data protection. But to Ian's point, managing all of our data, not just our PII, can make our business more trustworthy. It can make our business more efficient. And so really, it should be part of our overall data management strategy. So how about marketing? I mean, as a business person, I don't have a privacy policy because frankly, I don't market to anybody. How would you respond to that, Steve?
Well, you know, in terms of a post-pandemic society, 98% of businesses operate what we call an e-commerce platform, and you know, to be able to do that, you have to have a privacy policy on your website to identify to your customers what information you're taking. Are we using cookies geographically around the world? And yes, this is a Canadian clause, but some of these Canadian businesses may be interacting with European, UK, or customers from different parts of the world. And there are legislation in these foreign countries that, you know, encompass these Canadian companies as well. So a privacy policy, and I've always said this, is the window into the soul of your business. And it really does show that customer, that affiliate, that business partner, you know, how you look at privacy from a business perspective, and how you really look after your customer and your affiliate data. And it's there to give whoever interacts with you so much important information, how they can contact you, how they can enforce their personal data rights. And as I said, it could be the data rights from various geographical locations around the world. So in my mind, it's the number one thing every business should have. It should be on websites, it should be easily displayed in the offices, and it should be made freely available to all members who share their data with you.
Excellent points. And as you mentioned, Steve, this is a way of telling your customers, your employees, third parties, partner service providers that you care about privacy, that you are there to protect privacy rights. I won't go into detail. I'll just offer a teaser as well, because we will dive into this a little bit later in the discussion. But as well as it being a regulatory obligation, there are other benefits as well to having that privacy policy, and we will touch on that a little later in the presentation.
And Nigel, can I just add in quickly that people get hung up on the word market or marketing sometimes. In fact, you know, most businesses are sharing data in some way, shape, or form. So you may have clients, you may have, you do certainly have suppliers, you have employees. So, you know, you may not think you're actually doing marketing to people, but you are interacting with people outside of your own business. And when you do that, then you're into all the things that you and Steve were talking about. So, you know, don't pretend that because you don't quote unquote market to people that you don't need a privacy policy.
Thank you for adding that, Ian. You're absolutely right. So again, privacy compliance is more than just marketing, more than just a marketing function. Well, again, as a business owner, do I really need to focus on privacy and data protection? Because I just think that compliance, it's expensive, it's complex. I don't know where to start. I'm just really overwhelmed by the whole thing. Steve, how would you respond to that?
Okay, so some key words you've mentioned there, Nigel. First and foremost, you're overwhelmed. If a business owner is overwhelmed, that's why they should contact a privacy professional like yourself and Ian to come in and really help that business owner understand the outlook for their own business, but also compliance. You know, it may come across and look expensive because it's convoluted or looked as convoluted and complex, but the cost of not doing it greatly outweighs any cost of taking any compliance issues on board. And, you know, as I say, we have legal requirements. You have to ensure that we do data discovery, we do data mapping, we have a pathway for our clients to engage with us and to enforce their rights. So compliance, yes, it may look expensive and complex, but with an expert hand like yourselves, not doing it is going to cost your business a lot more money in the long term.
Excellent points. You're absolutely right. And it also depends, just like everything else when we run our business, how we approach it. So it can be complex, it can be expensive, but it doesn't need to be. And as a starting point, as a business owner or managing a business or any organization, we need to at least understand what our regulatory obligations are. And it doesn't take a lot of time or effort to start that process. And that's certainly something we can help you with. Did you have anything to add to that, Ian, before I move on?
It's like when you start business, you start doing bookkeeping. You don't know every aspect of bookkeeping when you first begin, but you start off and you incrementally improve how you're doing it. And you have a better source of information. And just like in privacy and compliance, you start off, you can make incremental steps to get moving in the right direction. And as you get more comfortable and you get more involved in it, you can add as you go along. So it's not an either or. There are many little small steps in between that can make you you make a huge difference in how you approach privacy and compliance.
So excellent points from both my colleagues. Keep it simple. And again, that's a rule that we should live by all the time. And again, Steve, very good point. Non-compliance can be a lot more expensive. So here's something that I hear a lot in conversations. I interact with service providers or third parties. They carry out different functions for me, and they take care of their own data. So I don't have to be concerned about anything that I share with them, do I? Ian, how would you respond to that?
Well, first of all, you are responsible for your own data. So if you're the processor, then you know, your data is your data, and you can be sure that the other companies you're dealing with, they may have systems in place, but the systems are generally on their end and to protect their interest. So the first thing to think about is anything that you generate and you share, it's your responsibility to get agreements in place to make sure that the people you're sharing it with take the same care with that data and do the same compliance that you're doing on your end.
And excellent points. And really in this day and age, none of us really exist in a vacuum. We may not think about that, but there are a lot of different dependencies that we have on various providers. It could be something like the way we run our e-store. It could be where we store our data. So we really are dependent on others. And there is, once we start to think about it as a business owner, there is a lot of interaction where data is shared. Did you have anything to add to that, Steve?
Yes, I think a key word you've used there, Nigel, is dependency. So if we are forming part of a wider supply chain, we are dependent on the quality of data that we collect from our third parties. We're also dependent on the safeguards they have in place as well, because as I say, we form part of this wider supply chain. If that supply chain breaks, it could cause problems for our business. So we want to ensure that we're receiving and sharing data with companies who have adequate safeguards in place. And I would say both organization and technical. And we do carry out procedures like threat risk assessments, and we do complete process agreements that really protect us and protect the data for our customers and potentially our employees as well.
And just, you know, from a practical point of view, guys, the other thing to think about is, think if you had a customer and there was a breach or there was a problem, do you really want to tell your customer that you thought the third party was looking after it and you did nothing about it? You know, think about your own interactions with companies. The last thing you want to hear from somebody on the phone is that it wasn't their fault. It was a third party that made the mistake.
As controllers, we are responsible for the data that we collect and process. And as processors, we have that same level of responsibility. And if a third party organization has a breach, or that third party organization hasn't got the adequate safeguards in place, that's detrimental to us, and our reputational value is also going to be damaged as well.
It's just bad business.
Yeah.
So the key takeaway is that data is a shared responsibility, and it's then part of that shared, the fundamental requirement of that shared responsibility is to make sure that data that is shared between yourself and any third parties or service providers is maintained at least the minimum standard at which your own organization maintains that data. So here's another one that I hear a lot. I don't get rid of data. All data is good data, because I don't know, I'm just going to collect everything and anything. I don't really know what I have. I don't really know what I'm going to do with it, but I just might need it in the future. And before I hand this over to my colleagues to comment, data is something near and dear to me. I have spent decades in data management, everything from database administration, database programming, data reporting. And one thing I will emphasize is not all data is good data. So one of the things that data can do is it can overwhelm you. So do we really need to have all that data? Do we even know what we have? And do we know how to take care of it? So I'll pass that along to Steve.
Oh, thanks, Nigel. So two things there. Well, the first thing really is, as human beings, we like to hoard. We like to collect as many things as we can and hold on to them for as long as possible. But when we're looking at the privacy and data protection, we must first look at the retention periods. How long are we legally allowed to retain that data for? But also the data minimization. Are we collecting the correct categories of data? We don't need sometimes to collect everything, you know, because that puts a risk to our companies for breaches, but more so than that, it puts a risk on the data subjects that we are controlling that data for. So 2 bits of advice: make sure that we only retain the data for the length of period we are legally allowed to retain that, because there are safeguards in place that allow us to then safely discharge that data. But also looking at the types of data and the categories of data that we collect, making sure that we're only collecting the correct amount of data to provide a service or product, or make sure that we're processing the correct amount of information for an employee, for a third party, or indeed for our customers.
Excellent point, Steve. Only collect what we need and only keep it for as long as its stated purpose. I have local knowledge of privacy requirements. I know a little bit about PIPEDA, the Personal Information Protection and Electronic Data Act that governs Canada federally, and CASL. I do, hopefully, check the do not contact list, and that's really all I need to do. Is it? So, Ian, do you have anything to comment on there?
Well, I mean, first of all, it's a great place to start, right? It's good. It's great your local knowledge. It's great you understand what privacy is and what some of your requirements are. So that's all on the plus side of the ledger. What's not covered in this is that privacy and privacy compliance, privacy laws depend on where the people are based. So you may be in Nova Scotia or in British Columbia or in Ontario, but if you have customers in the UK or in Spain or in Australia, any laws that govern those countries also govern you when you're interacting with those people. So it's great to understand local requirements, but depending on where your customers are located, where your suppliers are located, and where your employees are located, the world is much bigger than where you live in Nova Scotia, Ontario, or Saskatchewan.
And that really is the key, because we are talking about personal information. So it's not just where the business is located, it's where the information from that individual. And of course, these days, with pretty much every business having an online presence, that information could come from anywhere. Businesses and consumers don't care about privacy because it doesn't add value. So should I care about it? Steve, how would you respond to that?
Yeah, the answer there is privacy 100% adds value to your business, because you're going to have a safer environment for your customers, for your employees, for your third-party affiliates. And that can be used in a procurement process, because you can identify and demonstrate how effective you are when you are searching for new business. So we all want to grow our business. We all want to ensure our business is sustainable, and the longevity is there as well. So privacy is being looked at by investors looking for inclusivity organizations, and it really is a fundamental part of businesses globally moving forward into the next generation, the next 10 years.
Absolutely. And there has been a lot of high profile cases. Again, these might be with larger players, but what that does is it draws attention to the overall discussion about privacy. And around the world, we're actually seeing that reaction. So as consumers become more aware of their privacy rights, which are their basic human right, governments are responding to that. So it absolutely does add value, and it is important to be proactive, because the rules and regulations are not going away. They're only going to become more stringent. So with that, I think we've come to the end of our Devil's Advocate session. Thank you so much for your input. So now we'll go to the panel discussion. Before we jump into a couple of the pre-organized subjects, I will say, Steve, have we received any questions from the floor?
Yes, we have. We've got 3 questions to go with.
Sure. Why don't you hold on to those for now? If we have anybody who wants to unmute their phone and ask the question directly, then please have them do that. Otherwise, what we'll do is we'll cover a couple of discussion points first, and then we'll make sure that we leave time at the end for those questions.
Okay.
So the first one is privacy is an IT function. I got a guy. So is it really just a function of IT? Is privacy something that we can manage purely with technology? Ian?
You know, as you said, it's a great come up all the time. If people think privacy, they think IT. The way I look at it, the way I tell people about it is, you know, technology is how you do it, but data privacy and data compliance is why you do it. So it's the education side of it. It's the understanding what you're doing with information, where you're putting the information, how you're storing the information. All of we talked about in the first part of the conversation. So yeah, IT definitely plays a part. I mean, everyone uses technology in their business, or most people do, but that's the how. That's the the button pressing, and that's the collecting of the information maybe. But you need the education, you need the training, you need the understanding to to build a better mousetrap, right? It more goes into it than just the technology side of it. You have to make sure you understand, what you should be doing, what you can be doing, and what you must be doing.
And Steve, do you want to add to that?
Yeah, I just feel very sorry for all these IT guys out there that get lumbered with the problems that arise through privacy. So, we talk about our privacy ecosystem, and there are 6 functions of an ecosystem, and cyber and IT is just one of those functions or habitats that we look at. So there are more elements and functions within the wider privacy ecosystem. And as I say, IT is a fundamental part of it, but it's not the whole scenario. And we were on a call with the UK security services a couple of days ago, and 9 out of 10 IT and cyber breaches are actually caused by human error. So you may have an IT manager who's got a firewall and managing a DNS system and looking at all these vulnerabilities and threats, but the real risk is the human risk, somebody clicking on to potentially a phishing email. So, education is just as fundamental into privacy as potentially the IT side of it as well.
I'll build on that with a couple of observations. Thank you both for that input. So absolutely, cybersecurity is an essential part of the solution. We really cannot be compliant without the support of technology, but it really is people, process, technology. And as Ian and Steve have pointed out, that is the case. A recent survey of CIOs showed that more than 80% of them felt the biggest risk to privacy and cybersecurity is their own employees. And that's not necessarily nefarious. Keep in mind that there's a lot of focus put on external hackers, but really a data breach is just any unauthorized access. So it certainly cannot just be addressed as an IT function. So let's move on to privacy benefits. This is something that doesn't necessarily get spoken about enough. We certainly understand inherently that there are consequences for not being privacy compliant, but there's also a lot of benefits to our business. We have touched on some of those, where there's data management, the additional benefits of having a privacy policy. But Ian, would you like to offer some insight into some of the ways that being privacy compliant and moving toward privacy compliance helps your overall business operation?
Sure. I mean, you touched on it a few minutes ago on a different topic, but more and more consumers, more and more customers are aware of the importance of their data and protecting that data. So, studies have shown that more and more consumers are actively looking to do business with people who they feel are looking after their data in a safe manner and only collecting the data they need. And, example is now when you fill out a form, people are very reluctant now, for example, to put in their year of birth, because why do they need your year of birth? What's the rationale for that? It used to be in every form, we should all fill it in. And now people will say, no, I'm not going to fill that in. You don't need that. And just like if you walked into a business and you saw, files spread all over the back counter with names on it that you could read and what their illness was or what their financial situation was or what the police record was, you would probably have a very detrimental view of that business. You would, you don't want to spend your money, spend your time in a place that doesn't take your data privacy seriously. So it is a benefit to your business. People want to know their data is safe. They want to know the data is being used for the right reason. And they want to know that you're extending that beyond your own operation to anybody else you may be sharing information with down the road. So,
Steve, did you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, what I'd like to focus on is marginalized groups. So we're looking at organizations that help marginalized demographics in our society. And there's a lot of focus on what we call DEI data, which is diversity, equality, and inclusion data. So it could be things such as religion, it could be your sexual orientation, it could be religious beliefs or trade union memberships. And it's deciding how those pieces of information can be used to benefit, first and foremost, the people that we're collecting it on their behalf, and then also the growth of our business as well. So we can demonstrate to marginalized groups that we are providing services based on the information that we are collecting. And again, it goes back to data minimization. If we are only collecting a small amount of information, we can only be providing small amount of services back to a small area. If we open that up a little bit and we are looking at DEI data, we could be looking at health information, we could be looking at mental health information, disabilities, because we can be then providing more resources back to our marginalized groups. It could be schools, it could be education, it could be people who have just come out of prison and are trying to go back into society. So privacy really does benefit everybody, not just the business or the organization, but also the people that are potentially using our services or looking to use our services also.
Excellent points, both of you. And again, that's a very good point about not all data is the same. Some data can be very sensitive and have extremely negative consequences if it does get out. So just as a quick recap, we do understand some of the benefits are building trust with our customers, partners, and employees, reducing our exposure or risk, creating a competitive advantage, reducing cost through increased efficiencies by getting rid of data that we don't actually need, more uptime and system stability. And something else I'd like to introduce, and this is more specific to the privacy policy that I had said I would touch on previously, is that this actually is it's becoming more often now a requirement of third parties. So for instance, if you want to have an app on the App Store, Google requires you to have a privacy policy. If you want to use Google Analytics, they require you to have a privacy policy. Some e-commerce platforms will not allow you to have an online store unless you have a privacy policy. And this also can affect your search. So search engines are more likely to prioritize sites that have a privacy policy because it shows a higher level of trust and compliance. So those are some benefits that you may not think about. But again, in today's wired world, with us having a much larger online presence, those are very real benefits.
Could I add one thing in there, Nigel, because that's
absolutely
takes me on to something with privacy policy. So if you have a Canadian or a United States business and they're looking for European customers, again, with the privacy policy, we have what we call cookies. Now, we know cookies collect lots of information and sort of profile us and follow us around where we're shopping around the world. But if a US or a Canadian company is looking at a European base, they have to have a cookie pop up that pops up from a European IP address. So even if you're based in Vancouver, Toronto, if you're in Halifax, and you're looking to target European clients, by having a privacy policy and a cookie pop-up that comes up onto your website, that makes you allowed to trade in those geographical locations. By not doing so, you can still be fined. Like we know some of the big tech companies in the US are getting fined by the European data authorities on a week-by-week basis. And this is sort of coming down to SME businesses as well. And as you said, 98% of businesses have a e-commerce platform. So we're engaged in some sort of online interaction around the world. So it's just making sure that what we have, our services and products, are protected by the privacy tools that allow us to sell to those individuals. And having those correct tools will increase our turnaround and should potentially increase our turnover as well.
And just one final thing, Nigel, to think about is, back to earlier in one of my hobby horses, if you have well-organized data for your business in the first place, then being compliant and privacy is much easier. And as a package, it makes your business much more efficient. So you need the data anyway. You need it for marketing. You need it for accounting. You need it for taxes. You need it for inventory. You need it for all kinds of reasons. And privacy is one of those many things you need to have good, solid data for in a way that you can easily access it.
Okay, so maybe we've left the best to last. I didn't want to squeeze this particular subject, but I also want to allow some time for some of those questions at the end, Steve. Data breach, those two words that we really don't want to hear. So what I will do, I know we could spend an entire session just talking about the steps that we would go through in a data breach. But I would like to summarize very quickly that at a minimum, there are three things that must be in place. The first is just knowing that we've suffered a data breach. And if we do not have any kind of access restrictions or monitoring in place, how would we even know that a breach has occurred? And the second one is being both proactive and reactive. So having a plan in place. There is no such thing as a 100% secure solution. And so something we have to hope for the best, plan for the worst. So we must have a plan in place so that when that breach occurs, and as Steve had mentioned previously, doing an impact assessment, a threat assessment, we would know enough about our business that when a breach occurs, we can make that determination of how are we going to react to this. So having that plan in place and then being able to react to a data breach. Again, those are three absolutely critical steps, items. So identifying it, knowing the severity of it, and being able to mitigate the impact are three steps that absolutely have to be in place for every business.
Can I add something very quickly there, Nigel, because this is a panel discussion. I think it's so important to
absolutely
put across to our audience. It's quite startling. 61% of cyber attacks around the world turn into an actual data breach. So for all the phishing, the ransomware, the malware, 61%, which in my mind is a high figure, actually turn out to be a data breach. That means that potentially over half of the cyber attacks need to be reported to the data authorities, because then there has been a data breach. And then we have to look into the severity of that breach and having that plan in place to ensure that our customers' information is safe and secure, and there's no significant harm to those individual persons as well. So when we do look at human error, we're looking at the cyber error, you know, it's quite startling that 61% turns into what we call a data breach. And we do only see the big breaches around the world where there's thousands and thousands of data individuals concerned. But this is a figure that's targeting to SME businesses. So small to medium-sized businesses are dramatically increased to be at risk from those cyber criminals.
Okay, thank you for adding that. And I know that everybody has stayed on the call and joined in the first place because they really just want to get to the privacy jeopardy. But before we move on to that, again, this panel discussion is very important. We want this to be fun, but we also want it to be very informative. So I would like to open it up again to any questions from the floor. So Steve, you said that you had a couple that had come in.
Yes, I do actually. So I got a question here about the US. So obviously Canada, the US, you trade quite a lot. So as a Canadian business, what do I need to do if I'm trading in the various US states? Am I governed under PIPEDA? Does CASL come into it? Or do I have to look at more sort of generalized data etiquette when I am sharing data across border into the US?
Right, and of course the American model is much more complex. There are some states, I believe we're at five states currently, that have state level legislation, partly driven by concerns of TikTok and how much information is going to the Chinese government. The federal government, the US federal government has now introduced legislation, but as you can speak to, I'll hand it back to you in a minute, Steve. We are governed by the legislation where our business operates, but again, as we have mentioned previously in the discussion, the important thing is where the individuals are located. So Steve, did you want to add to that, or Ian?
Just the other thing to add to that is, I mean, health is very important everywhere in the world, but in the United States, it's actually far more strict than it is in Canada, with far more consequences for stepping outside the boundaries. So along with everything that Nigel talked about and that Steve will mention in a few minutes, just be aware that if you're in the healthcare space, particularly with anything to do with patient information, the U.S. takes it even more seriously than most countries do, and the penalties for being in breach are very serious.
Yeah, and I just want to add to what Ian says there. So the penalties, it's knowing your own backyard, knowing where your customer base is, because you may not only face a financial penalty from the region that we're collecting the data, we could also face the fines from our own data authorities as well. So I'm based in the UK. I could be doing business with American and Canadian companies. I'm also governed under US law and Canadian law, as well as UK data law. So I have to be aware of those risk factors, and I have to have a plan in place to ensure that I collect that data in accordance where my customers are based, and then how I process that data. Now, an example could be we've got data sites predominantly based in the US. You know, so we've got AWS, which hosts a lot of UK businesses. We have to be aware that that data is leaving our shores. It is going across border into a different country. And it's about making sure that our customers are aware. We communicate to our customers and our PII individuals that we are storing their data in foreign countries, for a better word, and then what safeguards we have in place to ensure that that data is kept safe and secure, because obviously it's out of our jurisdiction, so we have to have extra safeguards in place. So communication is so key when we are dealing with cross-border storage.
And even though this can seem very, very overwhelming and complicated, I really want to point out that at the end of the day, regardless of where the privacy legislation resides, the goals are the same all over the world. So we can reduce a lot of that complexity by just adhering to the standard principles of privacy legislation. And with that said, you will hear the term GDPR mentioned in terms of Canada, the US, countries all over the world. And one of the reasons that it comes up is because it is considered to be the gold standard. So it covers you in two ways. One is that we will make recommendations. Again, it is up to you as a business person what you decide to implement, but our recommendations will always be toward best practices. And by meeting those high standards, then you can have that comfort level that you are covered regardless of jurisdiction. So we have about 10 minutes left in our call. Did you have another question that you want to add to that, Steve?
Yeah, I do, but I think we've already answered it in that question. So it's all about fines. Can I be fined in my own state? So when you look at Canada, we have different laws in Quebec to what you have in Ontario and into BC, etc. So the idea is, can you be fined if you're sharing data out of Quebec and you're doing it unlawfully into Toronto or into Vancouver, or obviously over into Halifax? Are we only going to be paying one penalty fine if we make a mistake, or if we do something unknowingly?
Right, and as you mentioned, that is a compounded effect, because ultimately, as you say, we have talked about jurisdiction, and you are governed by the jurisdiction of the individual's data. Okay, so with that said, we've gotten to the most exciting portion, and what we want to do is try and bring together some of the information that we've shared with everybody here. So just as a quick recap, and again for our colleague in Wales, the long-standing, long-running game show, we have patterned it off of that, so it's been around for, I believe, over 40 years now. So it'll be in 3 rounds. The first round, you will select from a set of answers. The first correct answer gets a point, and we'll just have to trust that our competitors here follow the rules. The second round is the same, but the point values double, and then we will wrap up with what we call Final Jeopardy, which would be one question that must be answered, and contestants can wager their points. So with that said, Steve, Ian, you ready to give this a try?
I think, are we adding Sean into this as well?
Sure, why not? Sean's being patient too. So if you want to unmute yourself, Sean, and we'll go ahead. And I've got my paper here so I can keep score. All right. So, and since we're just introducing Sean here, we can let him choose first. So our categories are, how should I know? So those are questions specific to privacy regulations. Is that necessary? Those are questions specific to privacy requirements for every business. And what next? These are specific questions about a data breach. So Sean, why don't you go ahead and choose first?
Why don't we go with how should I know for 100?
Okay, and just to remind competitors, you can raise your hand to be the first to answer, but you must do so after I have completed the question or the answer. Okay.
Just like the
All right,
TV
so-
show.
Exactly. So how should I know for 100? Okay. Organizations are generally required to obtain this before they collect personal information. Oh, Steve's got his hand up.
Hey, what is this? Look.
You're cheating again. So I would say informed consent. We have to get consent before we collect any personal identifiable information from a data subject.
And Steve is on the board first with 100.
I'm filing a protest.
Okay, yeah, so informed or meaningful consent. All right. So Steve, you now have control of the board.
Okay, let's go. What's next for 300?
Ooh, what next for 300? And again, I remind competitors that you can answer after I have completed the statement. The information contained in one of these provides the insight to gauge the severity of a breach. And Steve is first again.
What a shock.
I would say data protection impact assessment.
That is correct. We were actually looking for a threat risk assessment, but we will accept data protection impact assessment. So Steve is out in the lead now with another 300 and still has control of the board.
Okay, is that necessary for 300?
Well, he's going for the big numbers here. All right. Completing one of these will identify the effect on business activity on the personal information that businesses process, store, and share. Beep, beep. Okay. I'm sorry, time had expired on that one. We would have actually accepted DPIA as well. In Canada, the DPIA is broken into two components. One is called the privacy impact assessment, and that is what we are looking for here. All right, so Steve, you have maintained control of the board. We will have our final first round Jeopardy. Go ahead and choose.
Okay, how should I know for 200?
How should I know for 200? This must be clearly stated as the reason for collecting personal data. And we have Steve again.
And
I think
Ian.
you might need to raise your hand. Your buzzer is a little slow on the
I
light.
think Ian was flashing the light. I'll pass it to
No,
Ian.
that's okay.
Go on,
Go ahead,
Ian.
Steve.
Go on, Ian. It's okay.
Go ahead, Ian.
You're flashing the light.
What is legitimate interest?
Steve, what is your answer?
So it must be clearly stated as the reason. So it's the we did this the other day. You've got a different terminology to how I would say it. So I'm going to go pass because I'm not going to make myself look silly.
Okay, so we will give the 200 to Ian for legitimate interest. We will accept that answer. The answer we were looking for is purpose. We must clearly state our purpose before collecting any personal data.
Tomato, tomato, Nigel. All right, moving on.
Okay, so Ian now has control of the board. We are now moving to our second round where point values double. So lots of opportunity for Sean to get back into the game.
A day in the
Go
life
ahead,
for
Ian.
400. Oh, go ahead.
A day in a life for 600. What the heck?
Day in life for 600. Okay, this could change the whole board here.
What does a day in the life mean? What do we have to do for that? Sorry, you have to explain to the non-Canadian person on the
Okay, I
phone.
didn't click the categories in this one.
Oh, sorry. Yes, my mistake. So Class Act is a category specific to, we will give you a statement and you must tell us which specific regulatory act that is from. A day in the life is focusing on privacy best practices. And he said, she said, are investigations by the privacy commissioner.
So I got to
So
change
with that said, Steve, did you still want to go with the day in the life?
Now I'm going to change it to he said, she said for 600.
He said, she said for 600. Okay. This company was banned in the UK, Canada, and Illinois for artificially assuming they could illegally collect images.
I think Ian's cheating here.
Was that Ian's hand going up?
Yes, it was. It was.
Okay.
Oh, I'm trying to think. I'm trying to think of the correct name of the company. Clear. What is Clear? Oh, Clear something.
Optics?
Is that an answer, Sean?
No, it's a guess, actually.
Okay.
Can we have a clue, Nigel, please?
Well, Ian is on the right track. He's just missing the second part of the name, so we will accept that answer. The full registered name of the company is Clearview AI, who just now goes by the term Clearview. And again, their argument when they were investigated was that, well, we're just scraping images from the web, and anything on the web is public domain. Well, apparently, authorities in the UK, Canada, and Illinois have all ruled that no, that is not the case. You must have permission. And the UK has even gone as far as requiring Clearview to remove all images of UK residents who have not given permission. So we will give Ian. So Ian is now in the lead with 800. Steve is at 400. And again, lots of time for Sean to catch up. So let's give control of the board to Sean.
Class Act for 6, please.
Class Act for 6. Okay. This act includes guidelines to regulate the personal information for employees of a FWUB being federal work, undertaking, or business. This act.
Wow.
And just to clarify, when we say federal, we would be looking at an industry, say, transportation, because the reason this is a federally regulated act is because it applies to businesses that cross multiple provincial boundaries or possibly operate at the company level.
So,
okay, Ian has his hand up. Sorry, Steve, he beat you to it.
He beat me to it.
Okay, go ahead, Steve.
I say Pepita.
Yeah.
And you are correct for 600. So you have retaken the lead.
See how nice I am to you, Steve?
All right, so one more before we go to Final Jeopardy.
Okay, so I will go for Day in the Life 600. Please.
Day in the Life 600. Okay, best practices. This is used to manage the storage, deletion, or destruction of personal data. Steve.
Well, I would say retention policy.
Absolutely. Retention policy or retention schedule is what we were looking for. So Steve firmly in the lead with 1,600. Okay.
I'm going to come back
with that.
There we go.
And with that, we will go to Final Jeopardy. So just because we've had so much success, we are going back to the category of regulation. So before we put up the final question, we will have to ask the competitors, and for this one, we will add 500 to Sean's total, so that he can wager as well. So Steve, you are currently in the lead with 1,600 points. Before we ask the question, knowing that it is about regulations, how much of your point total would you like to wager?
All of it, please.
Oh,
All the
in.
cheese.
Okay.
All in.
Ian, you're at 800. How much would you like to wager?
well, I got to be all in now for sure.
Good. Ian is all in for 800. And Sean?
All the cheese.
All the cheese.
All the
Okay. I
cheese.
thought maybe you go for 0 and play it safe. All right. So here we go. And
So we have to write down our answer. So
regardless of the number of records involved, in case of a breach, what determines if an organization must report the breach to a privacy authority? So regardless of the number of records, what determines if an organization must report the breach to privacy authority? And I'll remind our contestants that this category is under regulations. So remember, write down your answer.
Shout it out. Okay, I've written mine down.
Okay. And
No cheating.
I would be playing the theme, but the audio is not working at this time. All right. So, all right. So we will start with Sean.
Yep. I have nothing. I have no idea.
Okay. All right. I thought you might have written down something just as a guess. Okay.
Well, yeah, it would just be ridiculous, I think. So,
Okay. Next, Ian.
What is a threat risk assessment?
What is a threat risk assessment? Okay. And Steve.
Okay. What is the severity of the breach?
Right. And how do we determine that?
Through a threat risk assessment. I don't
All right.
understand the rules.
okay, good.
So the determining factor, and it could be just one record that's involved. It could be a million records that are involved. But the thing that determines whether or not it must be reported to a privacy authority. Now, how any company manages a breach is a separate process, but the requirement to report it to an authority is if you can determine there is a real risk of significant harm.
Can I add one thing in there, Nigel, as well?
Absolutely.
Looking at how do we decide then to report to the individuals concerned, so that the people who are potentially at risk from being harmed from exposed on a data breach. And again, there are loads of different ways how companies can do this, by email direct to the person, or they can do mail shots out through the press and the media as well, like some of the big companies would do for some organizations that are collecting X customer data. So then they put a big media post out there to say that they've been breached, like British Airways did a couple of years ago, just before the COVID pandemic hit the whole world.
Oh, Alex, are you going to accept my answer and make me the winner?
All right. Well, this is where I needed audio because.
Everyone's doing it.
Oh.
And I was going to play the hot chocolate song, but we all remember that, right?
Yeah.
So yes, Ian, you are a winner, and Sean, you are a winner, and Steve, you are a winner.
That's the Canadian way, isn't it?
Everyone's a winner for attending our session today, and hopefully having some fun with it as well.
Yeah, it was informative.
So in conclusion, again, I would like to reiterate that we are not selling you this. And if anybody does sell you any kind of solution that says they can keep your person identifiable information 100% safe, be wary, because there really is no such thing. However, every business must make a reasonable effort, and that is the word that you will see in all privacy legislation, and that is reasonable. So every business must make a reasonable effort to secure it and have a plan in place in case a breach does occur. So hopefully you have found this fun and informative, and we can certainly help if you want to start the conversation. So there are many ways to get a hold of us. Myself, Nigel at JWT Privacy, Ian or Sean would be happy to respond to you. On the web, you can find us at jwtprivacygroup.com, and we are also on LinkedIn if you again search for JWT Privacy Group. So I would like to do a big shout out to everyone who attended today, and particular thank you to our special guest, Steve, my colleague, and my colleagues, Ian and Sean.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. Thank you.
Thank you,
Great
guys.
job,
Have a good one.